And that brings me to, as far as like moving forward in our country, because it feels like America, and my case, as people know, and on our, viewers probably know, I came forward about Joe Biden sexually assaulting me when I was his staffer in 2019 and 2020, the sexual harassment and the sexual assault. And when I came forward, it was very politicized. And it seems like, and the Cuomo survivors went through the same thing where they got attacked kind of by a political machine. But what I noticed with human trafficking was the Epstein survivors, which was a human trafficking case, in that circle of the same elites there. You had the Clintons and so on and so forth, and the top Democratic elites involved a lot with Epstein. There was a political machine after them as well with the human trafficking, and it's a very complex issue. Did you help, or did you connect with any of the Epstein survivors, and how was that journey for you, and how did that go?
Yeah, actually, we met through Twitter. A few of them and myself. I haven't, of course, met all of them. There are quite a few, and I would love to, maybe at some point, if we have an opportunity to. But we connected through Twitter. It's been so interesting. All the survivors, like you and I, connected through Twitter. It's just kind of where I was because of the pandemic. Everything was shut down. It was like. So at the time frame when I kind of came out, and then, everything was happening with you, and same sort of thing with the Epstein Maxwell survivors.
Right.
So I try, and I used to be better at this. Now I'm like remembering some of the things that I used to be able to do, because things were a little smaller for me then. But before, I used to be able to spend a lot of time, like, just hyping up other survivors and, thanking people that were doing amazing things. And I still try to. I definitely didn't really fully stop. But so that's one of the ways that we connected was through Twitter. And I can say this, every survivor of Epstein Maxwell that I've met is absolutely incredible. And I'm just in my mind right now, I'm just thinking of Teresa J. Helm. Like, she's such a powerful survivor leader. She's so amazing. Now she's doing direct service as a survivor advocate. I'm not going to say necessarily where, because I don't have permission to talk about that.
Right.
But and just some of the things that I've seen these survivors do. I support them so much. And you know what? I've always been a little bit bummed. There are a lot of survivors I would love to speak to. I would love to connect with the survivors of R. Kelly to get their experience, not like for a podcast or any big public, production, just to let them know that, like, I support them. There are certain things about being a public survivor leader or a public survivor advocate or a public survivor that come with their own, I don't know how to explain it, but it is nice to know that sometimes, like, there are people out there that are kind of going through some of the same things, and that you're not alone, and that you see them and you remember them and you're thinking about them. I do like connecting with other survivors. And as far as the survivors go, I've just tried to help them and support them any way that I can possible. I've sat on 2 of their boards for different organizations that they've started and things of that nature. So.
Well, that's great. As you saw Amy Frank on my show, who did Never Alone Advocacy, who helps with military survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and so on. I think it's really important. And human trafficking is very complex. As you mentioned, the Stockholm syndrome, it's almost like a combination. Domestic violence gets in there because, the person trafficking has this relationship that's very complicated, usually with the victim. And very, it's hard to explain just how enmeshed that, to untangle the victim, how hard it is for the victim to untangle from that, as you well know, and for other, and people tend to be impatient, that don't understand the space, and wonder why people stay in those situations, or stay in, like, for instance, a domestic violence relationship. But, it's not that simple. You lose access to the world. And sometimes, you get things taken away, like transportation, access to money, you get imprisoned, things happen to where, and then you get in a cycle of poverty. Some people have substance abuse issues. I mean, there's so many things, so many barriers to freedom once you're in a human trafficking, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, you just nailed it.
Yeah.
I know that because of your experience as a survivor of domestic violence, you can relate really well to that. And, you spoke really well about very clearly and concisely on my podcast about those issues. Well, I mean, first, let's talk, the definition of human trafficking: force, fraud, or coercion for the sale of labor, sex. Globally, we look at like the black market sale of human organs. In the United States, that's a different crime. Illegal adoption, forced child begging, child soldiers. So, human trafficking encompasses a lot. But in some cases, you can have a coercive relationship with your abuser that is sort of a Stockholm syndrome and mirrors a lot of the domestic violence. Same with force. And that can be for labor trafficking as well. You can be in those situations as well. Threats of violence. There's so many things. It's such a complex, nuanced crime. And I'm telling you, Tara, it's like just about the time I'm starting to think I have some grip on what it might look like in one city or one part of the world. Then there are new things that come out, new technologies. Now we're talking about trafficking in the metaverse and what that's going to look like. So,
Wow.
No, yeah. So it's all of these things. Don't stop. I don't want to like black pill, be a doomer. I always have hope. I always have a lot of hope because I've seen a lot of change since I've been free, and I've just seen a lot of change. So I'm always very hopeful, but the crime is always changing. And I sort of related a little bit to drugs. Drug trafficking has changed, the drug sales, and all of that has changed so much. And, folks that profit in that area have a vested interest in staying a step ahead of law enforcement and anyone else that's fighting it. So, yeah, it's pretty hard.
Yeah, in fact, I shared a tweet, and Oz, if you don't mind throwing up that tweet of Eliza's, where I kind of talked a little bit about the America's response, to human trafficking. And
anytime I'm on doing an interview and somebody's like, I'm going to pull up one of your tweets, I'm like, which one?
Oh, no, this was a great tweet because you said all the things that I'm. Don't worry, it's not a bad one. This one was, you pointed out some really good points. And if you don't mind, I wanted to kind of bring this out. You talked about the CIA, the FBI, the UN, the police. Could you bring that back up just for a minute, Oz, again, so people can see it? You said, I don't want to fund this. Like, because because they're participating, they're perpetuating and abuse, child sexual exploitation. You were talking about this particular, the Epstein human trafficking. Could you talk a little bit more about this issue?
Sure, yeah. So the CIA has had a history before, but where I go back to is the most recent situation that was exposed in BuzzFeed News. Pretty much was crickets after this. I mean, the CIA has had a long history of child sexual abuse material and child sexual exploitation from within their ranks. The FBI has a horrible track record with covering up victims and survivors speaking out and stepping forward. They could have at any point nipped the Epstein thing in the bud, and they didn't. Wow, think about how many victims and survivors could have lives been spared and saved. This is no small order when we speak about these things. These are some of these young individuals' entire life will never be the same. Never be the same. This was their first experience, being in their first experience was being sexually abused by an adult, and some of them will never. I mean, we don't even know all the ones that are out there, and all the survivors that have never felt comfortable stepping forward. So,
Right.
And then the other part of that tweet, I can't see it big, but I think I said the UN because I'm always
the UN.
Yeah, I'm always picking on the UN. The UN has a long history of child sex abuse. You can find that on the UN's own website, and the UN admittedly does not take care of these issues. They do not hold abusers accountable. These are UN workers sexually abusing children that are desperate, dying of hunger, like very young. And they've also had a long history of sex abuse and sexual exploitation. The last time and this is in AP, this is, this is well reported on, but you can also find this information on the UN's own website. Because they talk about it. Why they don't do anything about it, I don't know. Why the United States continues to fund 22% of the UN, considering we know all of this. Why we turn a blind eye for one thing and continue to act like they're going to solve the rest of the world's problems. And then as far as the police go, when I was writing this tweet, I almost left this police part out. Not because it's not important, but because police officers are can consume this material off the clock. So maybe I'm not directly funding it, but it still kind of irritates me. Like, why are these individuals that are supposed to protect children, like judges and police officers, imbibing in this child sexual abuse material and getting arrested? So many that that I have at least one a week, if not one a day, that I posted at makes it to the corporate press. And on top of it, I don't want to fund it. I don't want to fund any of it. I would be fine if we abolished all these things. But I'm an anarcho-capitalist, so this is how I feel. And that I don't think, it's funny because I think when people look at that list, they all think lawlessness. That doesn't mean that when I talk about these things, I'm not talking about lawlessness, but these individuals can't even control within their own ranks.
Right. Absolutely. Right on.
I went on a whole rant, but that's it. Tara, this is
where I wanted you to go because these are the places people turn for resources, for help when they're desperate.